Right. So the lawsuit here, basically anytime you have an educational choice program, you can count on a lawsuit coming shortly after. That's why places like the Institute for Justice exist, to help parents to continue to be able to exercise these choices. But here it was a group of parents, a former public school teacher, I believe, and some others. And, ostensibly they're worried about the public school system having fewer resources as parents continue to use this program. We wonder why parents would want to choose to use this program if the public school system is so good. But regardless, the legal basis of the challenge is a provision of the Alaska Constitution. So Article 7, Section 1 of the Alaska Constitution prohibits the spending of public funds for, quote, the direct benefit of religious or private educational institutions. And so what the challengers in this lawsuit argued is this is violating the Alaska Constitution.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of American Potential. Alaska is known for its breathtaking landscapes and its untamed wilderness. However, its unique geography also presents challenges, and particularly in providing education to students all across the state of Alaska. Recognizing these challenges, Alaska started the Correspondence program to offer an alternative to the traditional school setting to help remote communities. Now, for decades, the Correspondence program has successfully served Alaskan families, benefiting students regardless of whether they live in a city or a remote region of the state. Now, the program offers a flexible and personalized approach to education, which allows students to tailor their education. Despite its success, the Correspondence program faced legal challenges when some individuals filed a lawsuit, arguing that it violated the state's constitution. Now, this legal battle brought some uncertainty to the families that rely on the program, potentially impacting access to the education that worked for them. So what happened with the lawsuit? I want to welcome Kirby West, who is an attorney at the Institute for Justice, and Andrea Moceri, who is a parent that uses the program. Thank you, Kirby. Thank you, Andrea, both for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Yeah, so this is interesting, and we can talk about some of Alaska's unique challenges. We were just talking before the show started. Andrea lives in Anchorage, but the vast majority of population of Alaska lives in Anchorage. But then there's all of these remote villages and other places, and so a program like a Correspondence program is really critical to a lot of kids getting a quality education because it's just Alaska's unique and different in that way. And I kind of wanted to lay that out. But Kirby, let me start with you. What's the history? Talk about the history of the Correspondence program and how does it work?
Sure. So as you were saying, Jeff, historically the program arose because of Alaska's kind of unique geography, and that there were people in outlying areas that didn't have easy access to a public school. Although interestingly, we do say this is unique. There are other states that have educational choice programs that
Sure.
arose for similar reasons. I'm thinking of Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire. But that's a side note. But in Alaska, the program arose where families would actually get their curriculum for their students, often by float plane, and the students would complete their assignments and then send it back to a public school teacher who would grade the assignments. And more recently, the Alaska legislature changed the program to basically broaden it and make it so that any student in Alaska could enroll in a correspondence study program, and that they could use the program in a whole host of different ways. So the families would get a student allotment of a certain amount of money, depending on which correspondence study program the family was enrolled in. And the families could then use those for any educational expenses. And so that could look like a more traditional correspondence study program, or it could look like homeschooling, where the parent is purchasing curriculum and materials to homeschool their children, or a mix where they're taking some classes at a traditional public school, and they're also getting tutoring in certain subjects, or they're enrolling in, taekwondo to fulfill their physical education requirement, or enrolling in online university courses. Really just appreciating that each child has their own unique needs when it comes to education, and the people who are best suited to meet those needs and determine how their educational needs should be met are their parents, and empowering them to make those choices.
Yeah, and that is certainly not unique to Alaska. We talk about that all the time here, how America, we've gotten it so wrong on K through 12 education for many years, where we created these sort of factories where we tried to, run kids through these factories rather than individualize the education that best suits them. No two kids are alike. I know that's true in my family. My two children are not anything alike, actually. But they had different needs growing up when they were getting educated and in school. And what this program does, and I think it's highlighted because of the remoteness of some of the areas of Alaska or Maine, as you mentioned, or some of the other states around the country. But the uniqueness is to break the mold that you have to go to a school because you live in a certain zip code, Kirby. And that's really the key, is it's giving these parents the choice to decide what's best for their children and get them the education that they need. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I was public school kid, K through 12, worked out great for me. My husband the same. But like you, we have 3 kids and they're all entirely different from one another. And we've made different educational choices for our kids than what we had growing up, because it's just what we thought was best for them. But we have that privilege because we could afford it. And we acknowledge that that's such a luxury that we could afford to enroll our children in private school. But programs like the Correspondence Study program in Alaska broaden that to families, not only the families who can afford it, but to other families who maybe otherwise couldn't afford that choice that others can afford to choose.
Yeah. How many students are in the correspondence program in Alaska?
I think at the latest count, it was about 22,000 students that were in the Correspondence Study program.
Yeah. So this is a big program, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Very well used and well loved by Alaskans.
Yeah. Do you know, and I hate to ask this question, you may not know this, and if you don't, it's okay, but how many of those students are outside of Anchorage? I mean, is it predominantly kids that are outside of Anchorage, or are there a lot of kids inside Anchorage that are taking advantage of it too?
I would guess so. I think it's pretty well spread across the state, but I don't know the exact numbers, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Andrea, let's talk about your son who uses the program. Tell us about your son.
Sure. So he's going into his junior year here at his private school, Holy Rosary Academy. And I started looking for a different education for him in 4th grade. We were in our neighborhood schools, but it looked like the curriculum was declining. And every year it was a struggle. It seemed like we were always threatened with losing teachers, losing music, art, and they got rid of the intermediate class for his group. And for me, as a single parent, I have to work full time because I need health insurance for both me and my son, and I need to be able to pay my mortgage and to put food on our table. So I don't have the luxury of being a full-time homeschooling parent. I found the school that best met his needs, and I love the other programs and the other classes that they offer on site. So I use the correspondence program for his subjects that he should be getting in the neighborhood school, and they've been struggling long before COVID. So like science, history, English, art. They offer other classes, which I pay out of pocket because he enjoys them. He enjoys the teachers. He's built great rapport with them, and they've helped his self-esteem really build up. And I know that even though he's a high school student, they offer before school and after school care that's affordable. So if I have an emergency at work and I have to stay after, I know he's in a safe place and he's not just going to be left to wander. And I know that if he chooses to do a sport, like right now he's really into soccer and track and field, I know that he's going to be safe I know that he's not going to be left alone. Our school is small. We don't even have a gym. And the coaches are parents who I've gotten to know and trust. And I know that my child will be in good hands. Um, just looking at the news, you can see these terrible things with bullying that is happening to these kids when they're supposed to be in the care of ASD. And when he was still in his neighborhood school, there were several incidences of hazing going on, which would have been his neighborhood high school during sports trips. So more red flags arose. Like, I don't have to concern myself with that at his current school.
Yeah.
When we were advocating, he was in a different correspondence school which was run by parents, but the Anchorage School District took it over. And when they did that, they immediately eliminated students who are full-time private school students from using the program. So when I went to go advocate for parental control of that charter school, I was very disturbed about the material that some of the parents were reading out loud to the school district that was in the libraries at the elementaries, middle, and high school age. I just was listening to what these parents were saying, and I was really disturbed that we have to worry about that. Like, at this school, I don't ever have to concern myself with that.
Right. And, as you're talking about it, you talked about your son's self-esteem. You've seen, what this has been able to do for your son. And, that's when I hear stories like this, and we're going to get into the lawsuit, Kirby, in just a minute. But when I hear this, it really does kind of anger me, because it really gets down to the core of what is education about. Is it about the system, or is it about the kid? And I just think, what kind of person would file lawsuits against a program like this that is helping kids? And what in the world how could someone think that it's up to them whether someone else's kid is being helped by this? It should be up to the parents of that child, and to that child, to make those decisions. But let's talk about that, Kirby, just a minute. Talk about the lawsuit that was brought against the Correspondence program in Alaska.
Right. So the lawsuit here, basically anytime you have an educational choice program, you can count on a lawsuit coming shortly after.
Right.
That's why places like the Institute for Justice exist, to help parents to continue to be able to exercise these choices. But here it was a group of parents, a former public school teacher, I believe, and some others. And, ostensibly they're worried about the public school system having fewer resources as parents continue to use this program. You wonder why parents would want to choose to use this program if the public school system is so good. But regardless, the legal basis of the challenge is a provision of the Alaska Constitution. So Article 7, Section 1 of the Alaska Constitution prohibits the spending of public funds for, quote, the direct benefit of religious or private educational institutions. And so what the challengers in this lawsuit argued is this is violating the Alaska Constitution because you have public funds that are flowing to private educational institutions as families choose private schools for their children. But again, the word in the Alaska Constitution is for the direct benefit of private educational institutions, right? And here, of course, the program is a direct benefit only for families. The statute is very clear that the student allotment is given to the family, to the parents of the child who is enrolled in the program. And then it's up to that parent to choose how to spend the allotment. And some of them, like Andrea, do choose to enroll their children in private schools, which is great. But many of them choose other options. Many things which can't be really described as educational institutions at all, public or private. Things like I said, Taekwondo lessons earlier, or rock climbing, creative writing classes, tutoring, all kinds of things really, and curriculum materials for homeschoolers. And some actually enroll in public university courses, which would also not, be anything like a direct benefit for private educational institution. And so really, I think clearly the challengers just don't want this program to exist. But what we're arguing is this is not a violation of the Alaska Constitution. It's only a direct benefit for the families who use it.
And let me just ask, the lawsuit was brought by whom?
Again, it's a group of parents, and that have chosen to file the suit to challenge the program. It's not a organization, so I'm not entirely sure, but just a group of private individuals.
Yeah. Is there any of the teachers' unions behind any of this that you can see, or any of the education establishment?
I wouldn't be surprised. They're often allies, and certainly, would speak out in favor of a challenge like this one, but not as a named plaintiff here.
Yeah. Yeah. So this lawsuit now that is out, where is the lawsuit now? Has it been filed? Has it been heard yet?
Sure. So the lawsuit was filed back in 2023, I believe, or late 2022. It in the trial court, we lost. The trial court judge actually struck down the whole program as unconstitutional on the Alaska Constitution. And it then went up to the Alaska Supreme Court on a very expedited appeal that was heard back in June. And the Alaska Supreme Court very promptly, within a day after the argument, issued a ruling in our favor, saying essentially that the plaintiff's attack had been too broad. So the plaintiff had argued that the entire program was unconstitutional in what's called a facial claim. So saying essentially that this whole statute violates the Alaska Constitution. There's no world in which this statute could be constitutional. And that's what the trial court judge had said. And the Alaska Supreme Court said, no, that's not true. There are so many uses of the program that don't even arguably implicate this provision of the Alaska Constitution, because they're not dealing with expenditures at any kind of private educational institution at all. And so they overturned the trial court's decision, which was great. And the program is now secure for this school year. Definitely a big win for us. We're very excited about it, but it does leave open the possibility that the plaintiffs here will now amend to bring an as-applied challenge to challenge only the use of the program, like families like Andrea's family do, which is choosing to use the allotment dollars at private educational institutions. And again, for the reasons that we talked about, we think that also has no legal merit, and we're going to continue to stick it out and fight that challenge, but that will carry on into the coming year.
Yeah. And this is, let me just quickly ask this, because I think the U.S. Supreme Court's kind of already weighed in on this, right? But what this challenge is and we're seeing this in lots of states now, that they're going and challenging it against the state constitution, or a particular provision of the state constitution. We've seen that time and time again. Is that what's happening here?
It is. It's a slight variation on the classic argument. So many states have what's known as a Blaine Amendment, named after, I'm sure you've covered this before, but they're constitutional amendments that prohibit state funding of sectarian institutions. And it's named after Senator James Blaine, who tried to get a similar amendment in the U.S. Constitution and failed. And these Blaine amendments have a history basically of anti-Catholic bigotry.
They do.
The public schools at the time, at the turn of the century, were essentially just Protestant schools, right? They read from the King James Bible, they prayed in school. But as more Catholic immigrants came into the United States and their children were attending Catholic schools, there was a fear of, kind of the papists taking over and getting public funds. And that sectarian was really code for no money going to Catholic schools. And under, very similar arguments in a pair of U.S. Supreme Court cases, Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue, and more recently, Carson versus Macon, which is a case out of Maine, the U.S. Supreme Court said definitively that not only is it totally constitutional under the U.S. Constitution for states to choose to offer educational choice programs that parents can then use at religious schools, it actually violates the First Amendment's free exercise clause if a state has such a program and excludes only those parents that are choosing religious schools. Sure. So if you have a program at all, you have to have you have to allow both religious and non-religious schools to participate. Now, Alaska is slightly different because Alaska is one of the few states that has a constitutional amendment that's broader than a traditional Blaine. So it does say public funds spent for the direct benefit of religious institutions, but also private educational. So it's religious or private educational institutions, which is why this hasn't, decisively been exactly head-on addressed by cases like Espinoza and Carson versus Macon. But the reasoning, ultimately, we think, again, under plain state law grounds, this program doesn't come close to violating the Alaska Constitution because it's not a, quote, direct benefit for anyone other than the family. But we also made a federal argument. That is that the U.S. Supreme Court has acknowledged for a century that one of the core protections of the 14th Amendment is, and one of the core protections of fundamental liberty interests protected by the U.S. Constitution is the right of parents to choose how to control and direct the upbringing of their children, including expressly decided in U.S. Supreme Court case law, including by choosing private schools for those children. So what we have said is, this is clearly decided under Alaska law without federal law involved at all. This goes in our favor. But if you want to read the Alaska Constitution in this way that would exclude parents who are choosing private schools, you're actually running into an issue with the U.S. Constitution because just as in Carson and in Espinoza, the states have been trying to exclude religious parents who chose religious schools from the program. Here, they're trying to exclude parents who are choosing private schools from the program. And just like sending your child to a religious school is an exercise of a fundamental liberty interest to exercise your religion, choosing a private school is actually also an exercise of a fundamental constitutional right to send your kids to private school. So I think, that's an interesting and a question of federal constitutional law that hasn't been directly decided yet that will be interesting in the future of this case, how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very, very well reasoned. And thank you for that explanation too. I think my view is that the Alaska Supreme Court can do the right thing here, or they can not do the right thing and it'll go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court will do the right thing. And then the Alaska court will have to follow suit. That's just my view. But let me get back to Andrea. When you heard about this lawsuit, I want to hear what your thoughts are, because we can talk about the legal arguments and the politics of this all day long, but let's bring it right back down to it. When this lawsuit was filed, were you concerned that your son was going to not be able to get the education that was best for him?
Yes, I was. It was actually heart-wrenching to see the news, and I actually tried not to put any of that on at the house because I didn't want him to lose focus on school. Right. And at one point he did ask me, am I going to be able to finish and graduate from this school? I said, you know what? You do your classes and you let me worry about that. We are not the only family who this is going to impact, and we're all going to get together to make sure that this program stays intact for all of the kids who are going to be impacted by this. I don't want you to worry about this. Mom's going to take care of it. We will figure it out. Right. So you do school. So it was very stressful, and almost his whole high school, we've been dealing with what may or may not happen with the ruling. And when the judge from the lower court came out with this, it came out like right when school was ending. And this was right when the homeschooling fair was going on. So a lot of these families, not just our family, was impacted. They couldn't buy materials for their kids. They just went to the fair and couldn't take anything home. And so everybody was under duress, and a lot of it came out like on social media sites. There was like really terrible comments coming out against homeschooling families attacking private school families, and public school families attacking neighborhood or homeschool families in private schools. There's comments like, well, I don't care if these private and religious school kids get a choice. Why do we have to sacrifice our program because they want us to pay for their whole private school tuition? That's not fair. but that's not how the program works. So I think what the plaintiffs, their goal was to get us all fighting instead of like working together so they can distract us and do whatever they want with our money.
Yeah.
Like, we're taxpayers. We have to work together. There are more parents than the whatever, like the unions and the superintendent and the ASD school board. There's only one board member on the board that actually advocates for families and the students. Everyone else just sees our kids with dollar signs. So I do care about the neighborhood schools. If the kid is succeeding there, they should get the best education. They shouldn't be threatened every year that they're going to have 3 more kids in their class. They shouldn't be threatened that their art, PE classes are going to be taken away. The homeschooling families shouldn't be threatened that they're going to be limited to only a few vendors. And as far as the private and religious school families, they choose those schools because those fit the best things for their kids. And what's getting paid there are like core curriculum things that are not being met in our neighborhood schools. So as parents, we all have to get together and advocate for our kids, because if we don't, the school district is just going to continue taking our tax dollars. It's like a bottomless pit. We just keep throwing money at it and there's no results. Our kids are not healthy. They are not happy. I'm tired of seeing all of these news articles of kids getting bullied. There was a very terrible article that happened last year at one of the local middle schools where a child was beaten up on school grounds and there were teachers present while this was going on. Mm-hmm. That's really terrifying.
Yeah.
And this is where the kids are supposed to be safe, where our tax dollars are paying for those teachers and those schools to be open. I don't want my child to have to experience that. No child should have to experience that.
Right.
Why do I have to wait till something terrible like that happens to be deserving of using my tax dollars for what meets his needs?
Right. Well, and if I would make the argument, if you're a parent and you don't like this program, this correspondence program, then don't use it. Don't use it. Send your kid somewhere else, but don't deny other people the liberty and the freedom to educate their children in the way that they want to. We've done shows. I would say this to both of you, but we've done shows. We did a show, I don't know, last year, maybe a year or so ago, where we had a young man who was bullied, and he was so bullied in his school that they had to get him out. And through the Utah education savings account law, he was able to get out of that school and go to a military academy where bullying is just not tolerated. He's flourishing now and he's doing great. And so that might not be the best solution for every kid, but for that kid, it was the right solution. And that is what this is all about, is finding the best solution. And who knows better about that? The parent or this plaintiff in a lawsuit who thinks they know what's best for all the kids of Alaska. Kirby, let me ask you, what's your involvement in the legal side of this case?
Well, I will continue to be fighting on behalf of Andrea and, our other clients who are taking a stand against this attack on their kids' educational plans and their kids' educational future. And I'll say, I'm that rare breed of lawyer that absolutely adores my job. And the number one reason for that is because I get to have the privilege of representing clients like Andrea. And just, it won't surprise you as a parent yourself, Jeff, to know that these educational choice cases, my clients are just the best advocates, and they are so committed to standing shoulder to shoulder with us and fighting these attacks on the programs. You just, you should be careful if you're going to try to come between a child and their future. Their mom's going to have something to say about it.
That's right. That's right. And it sounds like Andrea's one of those moms that's going to stand up and fight. I mean, I think through, as you were talking, I remembered another show that we did, another episode of this program that we did where a man started because his nephew had ADHD and he just wasn't learning in the school that he was in. So he started a school for boys with ADHD. And he said, they're thriving now because lots of times kids with ADHD, they don't learn in the traditional school environment. But he says, you take them to a national park and they learn. You take them to the zoo, they learn. You take them, out and they experience things and get to put their hands on things, they learn. And that's what this is about. And to me, it's just, I don't know any other way to say it, but it's kind of shameful that people think they know best what's best for all of these kids. It's very frustrating. Andrea, let me just ask you, obviously it was important for you to be a part of this case, both for your son, but I think you alluded to it too, for all of the kids that are using this program in Alaska and I think really around the United States. This is just a principle that I think you're committed to. Tell me why it was important, Andrea, to you to help push back on this lawsuit.
It's important to me because the kids, so I'm a Sunday school teacher. So I know Anchorage is the largest populated city, but it's 6 degrees of separation. I know a lot of these families. I see their small children when I see them in the store and they have a younger sibling, and I get to know the families and I hear the struggles that they're having in their neighborhood schools. If you want a future for your state and for America, you invest in the children and their education. I care about this country. I care about our state, and I care about my kids' future, and I care about all the kids who I see are struggling. And a lot of times there's a lot of families that are like mine, where there's only one breadwinner, and they can't always make it to these board meetings to advocate for their kids. Like the recent changes they're making this year, they changed the start times for high school, middle school, and elementary. A lot of the families get told, well, if you didn't like it, you should have come to advocate. Okay, these are hardworking families. I hear their stories too in the line of work that I do. So I work at a hospital as a financial counselor. So I help families who are not insured, no medical insurance, who are underinsured or have applied for Medicaid, which is the state's insurance program, and their applications are on hold. And it's because they don't know their system. And then I hear when I speak with them, all the challenges they're facing at home on top of this new medical emergency. And so I don't like when people get taken advantage of just because the system can. This is America, and we need to be looking out for one another for our future. And kids are our future, and they need to be protected.
Yeah.
We can't just let a system come tell us, oh, this is what you're going to do for this kid because this is what's the only thing that's open to you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I disagree.
Right. Well, look, I think the future is actually pretty bright for education in America, looking 10 or 20 years down the road, because we finally, you can see over the last 3, 4, 5 years, education savings accounts being passed in state after state, things like the correspondence classes in Alaska being or program being upheld by the Supreme Court. Those sorts of things are going to help, for educational choice and freedom in America. But I want to thank both of you for joining us. Kirby, thanks for the great work that you do. Andrea, thank you for the great work and commitment, not only to your son, but to Anchorage and the other kids in your community in Anchorage and in Alaska.
Well, thank you, Jeff, so much for having us. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yep. Okay. Well, listen, this is another example of why it's so important for parents to be able to make these decisions about the education of their children. And again, I'm speaking for me. I'm just offended, but quite honestly, that there are people out there who will go in and take court action to stop 20,000 kids in the state of Alaska from being able to participate in a program that they believe is, and that their parents believe is, the best education for them. So, for me, that's just, I just don't know. It seemed like I'd have to look in the mirror before I took court action like that, if it were me. But listen, this is about educational empowerment. It's about the parents being able to make these kinds of decisions along with their kids about what's best for their kids. It's not about systems. It's about individuals. and our children are always individuals and should be treated as such. Listen, thanks for joining us on another episode of American Potential. Liberty and freedom, they're easily taken for granted. Don't take them for granted. Go out there, defend freedom, defend liberty. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.